Hello, and welcome to our video for week 3 of the Way of the Desert, a week in which we find the Israelites still camped out beside Mount Sinai. Jesus was once asked what was the greatest commandment, and you may remember his answer. Surprisingly, he didn't quote one of the 10 commandments. Number 1, perhaps, you shall have no other gods before me. Or number 6, you shall not murder. Instead, he replied, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, and you shall love your neighbour as yourself. Love, Jesus taught, is right at the heart of God's purposes for his people. For some people who don't know their Bibles very well, they tend to contrast the stern, angry God of the Old Testament with the tolerant, friendly, easygoing God of the New. But when Jesus taught about loving the Lord our God and loving our neighbours ourselves, he was of course bringing together 2 verses from the Old Testament, from the books of Deuteronomy and Leviticus respectively. Most Christians wouldn't immediately turn to Leviticus or Deuteronomy to teach them how to love. They'd turn to one of the Gospels perhaps, or if they were more romantically inclined, to the Song of Solomon. But the truth is that there's a lot about loving in the Exodus story, not just about loving God and our neighbour, but more specifically about loving, respecting and caring for the poor, the elderly, the asylum seeker, our marriage partners, and even the land that lies under our feet. There's some pretty radical teaching here, but teaching too that is deeply relevant to some of the most significant debates of our time. The widening gap between rich and poor, society's treatment of older people, our response to refugees and asylum seekers, our need for stable family units, our care for the environment. What kind of society do we want to be a part of, and how do we build that society? That is the question that underlies our readings this week, with love right at the heart of the answer. And even in a book like Leviticus, much of which sounds very alien and strange to modern ears, there's astonishing wisdom to be found. Wisdom that's desperately needed in response to the huge challenges that face us as a society and in our everyday lives. St. Paul instructs the church in Ephesus to live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us. And such love must be practical and indeed sacrificial if it's worth anything, lived out in positive, wholesome relationships, in little acts of kindness, in a special concern for the least, the last and the lost, and in a commitment to sustainable living for the benefit of generations yet to come. Compassion fatigue, of course, can all too easily set in. Times of prosperity can make us greedy. Times of busyness can make us preoccupied. Times of struggle can make us self-absorbed. Times of disappointment can make us bitter. There's a kind of hardening of the spiritual arteries that can lead even Christian people into a place of indifference to those around us. But my prayer is that our reflections this week might soften those arteries once more, so that we are free again both to love and to be loved. For that is the very purpose for which we have been created. Enjoy the readings, and thank you for listening.